So this week, we get to our week 2 module. This week our reading is from chapter 4. We read chapters 1 through 3 last week. So now we're in chapter 4. We're going to just do part 1 of chapter 4. We're breaking it into, I believe, 3 weeks. So just part 1, I've got it listed here at the very bottom. You're going to stop at the end of page 53 where model and table begins. We'll model a table next week. So in this reading today, we're going to look at groups and how we work with them and manage them. We're going to look at some reasons that maybe your surfaces aren't filling. If it looks like you've got edges that all line up with each other, but for some reason a surface isn't happening, we're going to look at that. And then we're also going to look at changing some of our style settings. We talked very briefly about that last week, but we'll get a little bit deeper into the different settings that we can do within styles. So chapter 4, part 1, read to the end of page 53. I'm going to go ahead and get SketchUp opened up.
Barely touched them while they were and the whole thing went out. I might have to go to another.
Uh-oh.
I just wanted to turn it up because it was turned down.
I wonder if it's just something unplugged.
It's just the cords not that.
It's the cords.
On the monitor. Just make sure. Just not that.
Yeah, but if you can't get it figured out, you might want to move to a new one so that you can go through it together with us.
Okay.
Okay, last week we just used the architectural inches template. I'm just going to go ahead and use that same one this week, or if you created your own custom template last week, feel free to use that one. Okay, so just to kind of recap some things, we talked about how SketchUp is a surface modeling program, which means it's just surfaces built together to make three-dimensional objects. Everything is actually hollow though. And so our surfaces are going to be made up of edges and faces. So if I create a rectangle here, I've got 4 edges that create a surface in the middle. Edges are synonymous with lines, so you might hear me say lines sometimes instead of edges. The line tool creates edges, so those two might go back and forth. And then faces and surfaces, those are the same thing as well. You might hear those used interchangeably as well. So whenever you have at least 3 edges that form a closed loop, SketchUp should automatically give you a surface. So even if I didn't use the rectangle tool here, we'll get to the pencil tool this week, but even if I use my pencil tool to create individual lines, once I form that closed loop, SketchUp automatically creates that surface or that face for me. So every surface here has a front face and a back face. You might hear the front face called the normal, and the default for the front face is usually going to be white, a white color. The back side is usually going to be like a blue-gray color. That one doesn't have a fancy name, it's just back. It's the back side. And it's important to note that a face or a surface cannot exist without edges. If I get rid of one of these edges here, then my face is also going to disappear. So you have to have a closed loop of lines or edges in order to have a surface. Do you have a question?
Yes, you said there was a fancy name for the front face and I didn't catch it.
The normal.
The normal?
Normal. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's learn we're going to learn a couple new tools this week. Let's look at the eraser tool. It looks just like a little eraser up there, and the keyboard shortcut for that is E. So if you click E on your keyboard, that'll pull up the eraser for you. The eraser tool only erases edges. It does not erase surfaces. If I try and click on my surface here with my eraser tool, it's not going to do anything. It can only do edges. So if I click the eraser on an edge, it'll erase the edge, but it will not do the surface. Notice the surface went away whenever I erased the edge, but that's only because there's no longer a closed loop of edges. You can click on each edge to erase it, just one at a time, or I'm hitting Control Z to do my undo, get that back. You can also click and drag to erase multiple lines at once. So I'm just dragging here, and you can see the ones that I'm going across are turning blue, so that's basically saying that I'm selecting those, and then once I release, it erases them all. So you can either click on each thing, or click and drag to erase multiple items at once. Sometimes the fastest way to get rid of things, you can certainly use the eraser tool, but a lot of times we learned the select tool last week. A lot of times you just drag that selection box over whatever you want to delete and just hit the delete key on your keyboard. Either way works. What's important to note with that, you can click on a surface and use the delete key for it. So while you can't use the eraser tool to delete a surface, you can just select a surface and delete it from there. Okay, let's look at the pencil tool next. Yeah, I gotta get rid of my scale figure, she's already driving nuts. She just sits there and stares at you. So the pencil or line tool, it's technically called the pencil tool, but I call it the line tool a lot. Its keyboard shortcut is L. It's also, it just looks like a pencil up there in your toolbar. This guy will create straight lines for you. So whenever you are drawing, oops, that got a little crazy. Whenever you draw your straight lines, you want to always, like we talked about last week with the inference engine and trying to model very accurately, you always want to make sure that you're drawing parallel to the 3 axes, unless of course you have a very specific instance where you don't want it to be, but for the most part I'd say we're typically modeling along the axes. Ensuring that you're drawing parallel to the axes helps with your model accuracy, and the pencil is actually going to snap for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start at my origin, and you can see that inference engine at work. It's trying to tell me, hey, you're close to the origin, is this where you want to start? And that is where I want to start. So I just click once to start the pencil tool, and then I can start to move my mouse around in whatever direction I'd like. But you can see, actually it might be a little bit difficult for me to tell since I'm starting at the origin. I'm going to start just outside the origin. But you can see that it's snapping to those different axes for me. Again, I just clicked once and I'm moving my mouse. But it'll tell you whenever you're along the axis, it'll turn your line that color. If I go over here to the red, it's going to turn my line red. And it's also giving me that little dialog box that's telling me that I am indeed along the axis. Now you can also, here's one of those modifier keys that we talked about last week, whenever you use another key to modify what the tool is doing for you. I can, once I find that axis, I can hold down the shift key, and now even though I move my mouse away, it's going to stay along that axis that I was on. If I don't hold the shift key, if I start to move my mouse a little bit too far away from that straight line, my line is going to go askew. But if I hold down that shift key, now I can basically do whatever I want with my mouse, and my line is going to stay along that green axis for me. This also works holding down the shift key. Same thing works with the move tool. If I just create a quick cube here, I'm going to select it before I use that move tool, because remember with the move tool we need to select our objects before we can move. So I'm clicking M on my keyboard. Same thing here. I can start to move along an axis, hold down that shift key, and now it's going to stay along that axis for me. So shift is really your friend here. Back to the pencil tool, it has a rubber banding effect, and what that means is that you can continuously keep on drawing. Once I click, and I can click again to finish a line, it automatically is letting me continue to draw. It's not like I can only draw one line at a time and then I have to restart and keep on going. It's just gonna allow me to keep on drawing as long as I'd like to go. And so then the end point of one line turns into the starting point of your next line. If, whenever you're like, okay, I'm done drawing, it'll either finish for you if you come back to your starting point. So if I come back to that initial point, you can see that my line is now closed, it created a surface for me, and the pencil stopped. But let's say that I'm in the middle of drawing here, and maybe this is as far as I want to go. I don't want to keep on drawing. We talked about last week, the escape key. Anytime you want to stop an operation, hit the escape key, and it'll be done for you. You can also just hit your space bar and go back to your select tool. And we also have the freehand pencil tool. That would be still up where your pencil tool is. You just need to hit the little drop down next to it. Or if you've got your large tool set here with you, it actually separates the two out. So it's got the pencil on one, and then the freehand is just kind of that little squiggle tool. So just depending if you have tool sets that have all those icons out for you. Otherwise you can hit that drop down for the freehand. I don't believe SketchUp has a default shortcut for the freehand, but we did learn last week how we can add some new keyboard shortcuts. So I doubt that you'll find yourself using the freehand tool too often, but if you're like, man, I would really like a shortcut for this, we learned how to do that last week under Window, Preferences, and Shortcuts. You can come in here and add your shortcut for that freehand tool if you would like. So the freehand tool, this one actually is a click and drag for your freehand. So whereas the pencil one, we just clicked and then we can keep on clicking to end, the freehand tool, you are clicking and dragging, and you can basically just create whatever kind of curve that you like. Again, not sure that you're going to use that one too often, but there it is if you would like to. We should not be using the freehand tool for straight lines. If you want your straight lines, use that pencil tool, much more user-friendly. Questions so far? So the next topic we're going to get into is what's called stickiness. And stickiness is the fusion of objects that touch each other. If they're touching each other, they tend to stick to each other. So let's see what I mean by that. I make a cube here. And let's see here, I'll make another cube. And let's say that I move this cube to come and touch this one here. If I then, it's going to be, first of all, very tricky for me to try and just select one of these two cubes, because now they're all touching each other and it's going to be hard to separate the two items. But if I tried to, I'm going to drag a selection box around this one cube. It looks like, you can even see down here, it's starting to grab some different edges and lines that I might not necessarily want. Even if I try to deselect those things, let's just see what happens if I try and move this away. Oh man, that first cube is just getting all sorts of messed up. That's what stickiness is. It's whenever adjacent objects are touching each other and they stay fused as you try and move things around. we're gonna learn how to manage that with groups. We're gonna get into it a little bit more in depth with tonight's assignment, but let's go ahead and take a look at them. So groups are basically a way to isolate geometry from each other or from the rest of the model so that you don't get this effect of sticking to each other. So a group is just a collection of geometry. You can put any type of geometry into a group. It can be surfaces, edges, text boxes, dimensions. We haven't gotten into those just yet, but just know any geometry you can put in there. So to create a group, it's going to be very difficult to create a group once your objects are already touching each other, because you gotta pick and choose what's going to go in your group and what's not going to go in your group. So my advice to you is just as soon as you build something, group it. It's okay, you're not going to have too many groups. It's really going to help you with your model organization. You're going to be a lot happier with yourself if you group things and keep it all nice and isolated and organized. So in this instance, what I would have done, of course now I could try and go around and pick and choose every line and surface that I want in here, and you might eventually be able to isolate what you want and get that into a group. But ideally, as soon as I created that first cube, I'm going to go ahead and group it. And the way to do that, you select all of your items that you want to be in the group. So I'm just going to draw a selection box across my entire cube here. You right-click the object, and then there's something called Make Group. You click on that, and now I've just got this one group here. If I click on even just one surface of this, it's now selecting the entire cube. Let's see what it looked like if it wasn't in a group, just so that we can see the difference here. I select one surface, it's only highlighting that one single surface. If I select anything on my group, you can see those blue lines, it's highlighting everything, so it's selected my entire group. You can even put groups inside of groups. That would be called a nested group. So to edit, get rid of that guy. To edit a group, I can keep on editing this group. I can go in and add more things to it. I can still modify this group. You can either right-click and hit Edit Group, and it's going to open up the editing box. That's the dashed line that you're seeing around your group. That lets you know that, hey, I'm right in here. This is what you're editing. But it also just shows you the extents of your group. If my editing box was, huge and way off over here, that tells me that there's something way over on the side of my screen that's in that group. But it's just nice and tight around my cube, so I don't have anything else inside of my group. The other way that you can start to edit a group, aside from right-click Edit Group, you can just double-click your group, and it'll open up that editing box as well. It's a little bit quicker, that's what I prefer, but whatever works better for you. So once I'm gonna start to create a few more things out here so that we can see what it does. So these objects that I just created are not inside of any group, they're just free geometry right now. My cube is still inside of its group. Whenever I right-click on, or whenever I double-click on my group to open up its editing box, you can see that everything else that's not inside of my group just went gray. Yeah.
What did you say to get the editing box?
You can either right-click your group and hit Edit Group, or you can double-click the group.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
There you are.
I see it.
Yeah. So we saw that everything else that was outside of my group has turned gray. And
Right.
so I cannot edit anything else if it's not in my group right now. If I want to go back and edit these other elements, I have to be out of my group editor. And the way to get out of that, just click away. Click somewhere that's not inside of your group. That'll close the editing box, and now everything is back to its normal color. But I'll go back inside to keep on editing my group. So once I'm inside of the group editor, Now things look normal to me. I can select individual edges and surfaces. Everything's all normal here. I can continue to edit. Maybe I want to build another cube over here. And you can see that my editing box has now expanded because I'm still building inside of the group. This is very, it can cause confusion as you go through. People might be like, why can't I edit this thing? Or why is my editing box all over the place? You just have to be very organized with what you're putting inside of groups and realizing when you are editing inside of a group and when you are not. So that editing box and everything graying out is going to help you to determine when you're inside of a group or not. So if I wanted to create another cube over here, I could. And right now these are just kind of in the same group, everything is loose. However, I can, if I want to further separate these two geometries, I can select this new cube that I just created, right click, and I can make another group. So I can make a group inside of my group. This can go infinitely. You can just keep on making groups, and again, these are called nested groups. So then from here, I can double click into this other group, and now you can see I've got another editing box around this smaller one, and my original cube has grayed out now. Yeah.
Sorry. Why did it connect together? Because I was doing the same thing, and it was in the same little box.
Like this initial box here.
Yes. Why did you do that?
Because I was already inside of editing my original group whenever I created this cube. If I would have been outside of the group, I just clicked away and now I'm back into kind of that main model space. But you can see if I click on this, it's all within the same group. If I didn't want it to be in that group, I would have had to click outside of the editing box and then create the cube. Now, if you've noticed that you have created your two cubes within the same group, and you didn't mean to do that, no problem. To kind of get out of a group or like, I guess dissipate a group, I don't really know what word to use, we call it explode in SketchUp. So when you're outside of the group, you're not within editing mode, you right click the group and hit explode. And that's gonna put it back to its individual geometry. Now you can see in this instance, this is all loose geometry, my original cube that I created, because you can see the hatching, the dot pattern on the surfaces, everything is individually selected here. But this one is still in a group because I created that nested group, the group within the group, and so it didn't explode that second group that I created, it just exploded the overall group that I created. I'm going to undo, go back to our one group here. I can double click into this group to open up that editing box again. And I can just explode this one single group that I created here. If I don't want this one in its own group anymore, I can just go ahead and right click and explode that one. And now it's back into its individual parts and pieces, and now I've only got the one group. Does that make sense? Yeah. Groups can be a little bit confusing. See how many times I can say group as I'm trying to explain the group. Okay, so that's how we manage stickiness. We want to isolate that geometry into their own groups so that they no longer stick to each other. And groups, they solve that stickiness, but they also make it easier to move, copy, rotate, whatever, to different geometry. If you know that you're going to be wanting to do a lot of things with kind of this one cube, great idea to go ahead and group it so that you're not having to reselect all of these items every time you want to do it. You just can click on that one group and go have fun, do whatever with it. So, grouping, awesome for your model organization, gonna make your life easier. Okay, let's see here. I kind of blasted through my notes without reading them. Okay, looks like I got through everything I wanted to talk about groups. let's move on to causes of a non-filling face. So we talked about whenever you have a closed loop of lines, that should automatically give you a surface or a face. If that doesn't happen, let's talk about a few reasons why it might not be happening. So one thing, your model is either super large or super small. Sometimes SketchUp just kind of bugs out whenever you create something that is either super massive or really, really tiny. So if you're creating something in here way close to the origin and it's only millimeters, SketchUp's going to be like, this is barely even visible. How are you going to expect me to create a surface out of that? So if you're trying to make something really tiny, that might be a reason. A main reason is that your lines are actually not connected. They might look like they're connected whenever you're out far, but they're actually not connected to each other. So here's where we can start to look at different styles that can kind of help us determine where the lines are not connected. So whenever I start to draw, actually I'm going to use the pencil tool. Oops. L for line. I always get confused between P for push-pull and L for line. I always think P is pencil. Maybe I should customize my own shortcut keys. Maybe I can make P the line tool. But then I would probably mess up push-pull. Okay. So, whenever I start to draw with the pencil, I actually try to start at the origin, but I'm going to get away from the origin just so that we can see a little bit clearer as I'm drawing here. I don't want to be right on top of the axes. So whenever I start to draw, you can see that these lines are looking pretty thick right now. As I'm modeling the different ones, they're nice and thick, and then once I go to form that closed loop, as soon as I click there, the surface is created. And then if I created another rectangle within here, you can see that those lines are quite a bit thinner than my original rectangle. And so SketchUp is doing that. They make profile lines a little bit thicker for you. So that might be one way that we can kind of start to see where there might be some missing connections. You can make profile lines even a little bit thicker to make sure they are indeed connected. So in your default tray, that's your little floating window over here. Again, if you don't have that up here, you go to Window, hover over Default Tray, and click Show Tray. And in this default tray, we have a panel called Styles. So this Styles panel, just kind of a quick introduction. There are a couple of default styles that are up here. You can click on the different folders and you can see how these different styles might start to change the way that your SketchUp space looks. You've got some sketchiness, it changes the color of the ground plane and sky, maybe a little bit sketchier looking, lots of different styles that they have. But you can also just kind of start to, go back to my default. You can also just start to make small edits. You don't have to go to a completely new style. You can go over to the Edit tab here, the second one next to Select. And we're not going to get into all of these just yet, but you can see these different settings across the top here. We've got edge settings, face settings, background settings, watermark settings, and model settings. We're going to stay in edge settings for just right now. So we've got one called, there's edges, back edges, profiles, all these good things, you get your endpoints. Let's just start to click through and see what some of these do. So if I unclick edges, that actually gets rid of any lines that are not profiles. Profile meaning that they are the most, like the outermost edges of something. So I definitely want to keep that one on. But our profiles here, if I turn off profiles, then you'll see that my lines that were those outermost edges, they all of a sudden are not quite as thick anymore. they went back to kind of that thin line. I'll click my profiles back on, and it came back to the thickness, and I can even increase that thickness. Right now it's just set to 2. Let's see what happens if I move it to 6. Super thick. So that's something that you can play with, see if that kind of helps you out a little bit. Put it back to 2, I don't like how thick those are. You can also increase your endpoints. You can make those a little bit thicker, so once I clicked on that endpoints, now you can see it kind of thickened up my points here. So that might start to be helpful as you're looking for those non-connection points. You can see where those endpoints aren't quite meeting each other.
I have a question. How do I get, I think you said it on the other computer, this one's new. How do I get the directory, the one that you have on the side? How do I get that?
The default tray,
Yeah.
you'll go to Window in your menu bar, hover over default tray, the very first one, and it should say show tray. You just click on that. Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna turn those endpoints back off because I don't really like the way that looks, but you might like the way that looks. Another reason that you might not have a face that's automatically filling is because you have a lot of overlapping geometry, and SketchUp just doesn't really like all that overlap happening. You can use a different style to kind of search for that by going, again, we're in our Edit tab over here, and we're going to go to the face settings, which is the next cube over from your edge settings. And there are a couple different types of styles that you can do around here, but there's one specifically that I want to look at called X-ray. If I click on that, I don't have a lot of things drawn here, but let me go ahead and create another one.
How did you get to the X-ray one? I don't see the choice.
It is in your styles panel here. We go over to the Edit tab.
Yeah.
And then you want to be on face settings, which is the second cube here up at the top.
Oh, I see.
And then there's an X-ray button.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when I turn that X-ray on, everything is kind of see-through, and you can start to see where there might be some overlap. So maybe you find that one helpful. Let's turn that back on. There might also be a reason that some endpoints are not aligned. So for example, this one is a nice straight line, but let's see if I can manipulate something here. This will kind of create a little bit weird surface for me, but let's say that that surface didn't happen for me. Now, obviously, you all saw me move that endpoint, but let's say you're looking at it kind of like this, and you're like, hey, why is this not filling for me? This looks like a rectangle to me. We can kind of check to make sure that our endpoints are indeed all on the same plane. You can do that with two different ways. One is with the tape measure tool that we learned last week, so that was clicking T on your keyboard. If you just hover over an endpoint, I'm not clicking anything, you just hover over it, that little dialog box will come up and it's going to tell you the exact coordinates of that endpoint. So I'm hovering over the origin point right now, so it's telling me 0, 0, 0. I'm going to go ahead and look at this one. So it looks like we're in the line with my red axis there. I come over to this one. Whoa, what are all these crazy numbers? Well, that's telling you you're not all in a line. It should be a 0 if it was in line. You can also see those endpoint coordinates with the text tool. Let's see if I can find it here. There it is. I don't think it's in your initial getting started toolbar, but it is in the large tool set. Just looks like a text with a leader on it, or you can also, I believe, hit T. No, T was tape measure. I'm not sure if text has a shortcut. If it does, I can't remember it right now. Okay. You do the same thing here. We can click on an endpoint, and then as you start to move your mouse away, you can click again, and it'll kind of give you that little dialog box of those different coordinates. So that, I guess, is if you actually want to see those coordinates sticking out, you can have those. So either hovering for the tape measure, oh look, I can use my eraser tool on the text. So either tape measure, hovering over the endpoint, or using that text tool to see what your coordinates are. And then another major one that I see quite often is that your lines aren't actually parallel to each other. And we can play with another style here to make sure that they are indeed all aligned to the axes. I'm going to first create a cube that's nice and all parallel. And I'm going to go ahead and create a bad one too. So this is the difference. So I'm going to my style settings. And I'm going to go back to those edge settings. At the very bottom you see color. Right now they're all set to be the same. They're probably all black. That's probably the default for you. Instead of making them all the same, we can hit that little drop down and we can do by axis. If I click on that, then it turns all of my edges the color of whatever axis they are parallel to. So all of my red lines mean that they're parallel to the red axis. I've got blue ones, I've got green ones. But you can see these ones didn't turn any color, they're still black. That's because they're not parallel to anything. So they would be my problem there. If I was having issues with my model, it's probably because these are not parallel to what I was trying to model to. Maybe you do have an instance where you don't want to be parallel to the axes, so that would be one thing, but if you are trying to make all of your lines straight, parallel, but something is not going right, just try doing that color by axis and you can see where the problems are. You could also, what might help you kind of see the parallel lines a little bit better, you can show crosshairs, kind of like AutoCAD does. You can go up to Window and Preferences and go to Drawing. And you can display crosshairs. Okay. Now whenever I start to draw something, it gives me kind of all the axes at my pencil tool. So maybe that helps you, be able to tell a little bit more of when you're parallel and when you're not. Because I can still see all of those axes when I'm not parallel. But if I am suddenly parallel to the green, then that little green crosshair goes away. So that might be something that you find helpful, yeah.
Can you repeat what you just did?
To get the crosshairs?
Yeah.
I sure can. I went up to Window and Preferences. It's the Drawing category. And under Miscellaneous, I checked Display Crosshairs. I'm going to go ahead and disable them because I don't really like them, but you might like them. You have a question?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how did you get the part where it says the color?
Yes, that was in your Styles panel, under Default Tray.
Oh, you gotta go back to the default tray. Okay, never mind. I was
Yes.
still on another little. I see
Okay,
now.
so over on the edge.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
I was on the other thing.
Perfect.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then just real quick, kind of some best practices for your modeling. We talked last week, start your model close to the origin. SketchUp gets a little bit glitchy as you start to get too far away from it. Model in the upper right-hand quadrant, so the space where all the numbers are positive, where all the axes are solid. That'll give you some better results. Align the front of your model to the red axis. And what that really will help with is whenever you do your standard views, we looked at last week, we can do top, front, left, and right. SketchUp has the red axis as its front. So if your front is actually to the side over here, well then all your standard views are going to be a little bit messed up because SketchUp doesn't know that you put your front over on the side. And then always model nice, straight, accurate, parallel lines. You might not believe me now, but once we get to that tiny house and you start to get into a world of mess, I'm not going to be able to help you. Well, I'll try to help you as much as I can, but you might be too far gone. It'll be so messy that it'll be hard to get it back into where we want it. I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but nice, organized, clean models will make you like SketchUp. If you are not modeling straight, keeping your model organized, you're going to hate SketchUp. And we don't want to hate SketchUp. Okay, any questions so far before we get into the assignment?
How do you keep it from is this like, you know how that part that looks like the sky?
Mhm.
Like, say you mess up and you start panning and move stuff all over the place. How do you reset the screen to go back to its original? Is that, you know how some
I think the
things?
zoom extents that we learned last week would probably be most helpful.
Oh, God.
That
But
little,
it went opposite.
I wonder if it's because you don't have anything modeled. So maybe it's just confused. At this
Oh,
point.
okay.
Press control. Sorry.
Excellent. Because I just messed that all up. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can start to get a little crazy
Yeah.
all over the place. It's a little bit
But,
difficult.
yeah, because I always find myself losing my spot. Like, if you start there and then you start moving around and stuff, like, how do I move the screen?
Press and hold this.
I did. It's not going back. But I'm going to just get out of this and start over. But whatever reason, it's not going. I get what you're saying. I tried it. It ain't. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's something I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, I would try the zoom extents.
All
Or-
these different things. Like, I'm at where I want to be now, but I'm trying to
Feel good.